Zach Benson continues to impress with every viewing. We'll talk about some more preseason standouts, including Matt Poitras, Lian Bichsel, and much more. And we'll link things off by talking about Aron Kiviharju's injury that'll sideline him for 4 months. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High. And on today's show, we'll be talking first and foremost about Zack Benson again, because he just continues to score in this preseason and has more than likely kind of cemented himself as a top 6 option, at least for the first 9 games of the year before his case is reevaluated. But we'll talk about that for our first segment, kind of evaluate where he stands. And then we'll go into our second segment and talk about some more preseason standouts among prospects, including Matt Poitras, Lian Bichsel, Nate Danielson, and Simon Edvinsson. So some Detroit Red Wings talk for you as well. And then we'll end things off with Aron Kiviharju's injury. He suffered a major injury. He's out 4 months. We'll talk about how that'll affect his draft rankings, how, missing the World Juniors can affect the players' standings, that kind of thing. We'll get into all of that on today's episode. But before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a comment letting us know what you wanted to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's start off with Zach Benson, because we have to. He has taken this preseason by force and has really cemented himself as an option for the lineup for Buffalo. He's just simply been one of their best players and absolutely been the best 2023 NHL draft eligible so far in this preseason, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, it's been great to watch. I mean,
Yep.
He's been playing so well on that top line in Buffalo with Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner. He's a really natural fit in there. I think the line just really works well for all 3 players involved. You have the pure finisher in Skinner, you have the skilled power forward in Thompson, and then you have the puppet master and high motor player in Zach Benson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just works tremendously well. And he's showing off exactly why a lot of us public scouts had him ranked inside the top 5. And Buffalo made away with a real steal at 13th overall. And that's become apparent within just a couple months of the draft. So I feel very happy for him.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that's so funny is that what we saw from him and what we described from him in Winnipeg last year is exactly what we're seeing right now. No matter what line he's paired on, that line becomes the first line. And when he was when he was paired with Jordan Greenway and Casey Middlestat last game, he still came out of that as a player who was able to put points on the board and have a really, really good impact on the game. It's just so funny to watch that, exactly what we described from him in junior is happening at the pro level as well, where he's just making any line he plays on better. He elevates his teammates so well. He's able to play off of their strengths so well, understand their mindset heading into the offensive zone really well. I mean, it's just who could have predicted this, right? I mean, it's not like any one of us was singing his laurels all year, saying how he should be a top 5 pick and how he's not as far from the NHL as his size would suggest, and it's just very interesting to watch him go about it, because it's everything we've said about him in his draft year, just materializing at the pro level now. I mean, that jump is not for everybody, right? This is an exceptional case. Like, it's very rare that we see a player make those jumps like so well and have the exact same impact on his team that we're seeing in junior right now at the pro level with the Buffalo Sabres of all teams, who have a really stacked prospect pool, and he's standing out by far. Like, Matt Savoy could be in this position, JJ Peterka can be in this position. But no, it's Zach Benson, right?
Of course, it always is. And if he were to stick in the NHL, what are your season predictions for him?
Ooh, man, this is going to be tough. I'd say the optimist in me sees like a 50-60 point season out of Zach Benson in his draft plus one we are talking about a player who isn't at his peak physically, and still has some things to learn. But you just look at his game and just the decision making so solid, the playmaking ability so solid, especially if it's paired with a Tage Thompson who can just park himself anywhere and score. And especially if he's kind of playing a lot of time with JJ Peterka, who's got that kind of run and gun mindset that really complements what Zack Benson does so well. I mean, you're looking at a lineup that can benefit him in so many different ways that I wouldn't be surprised to see him as kind of a top 9 player playing either on the first, second, or third line alternatively, game to game, and just overall putting up like 50 to 60 points. Do you see that as a realistic possibility, or?
I do. I think that Benson is a player who thinks the game at a high enough pace to make a shockingly smooth transition to the NHL as an 18-year-old, which is not something that many prospects have been able to do in the past 5 years. I mean, Bedard is likely going to be one of those exceptional cases, but I mean, even players of the caliber of Jack Hughes have struggled to adapt as NHL rookies.
Yeah.
So while it may come across as overly bullish to make a prediction of a 13th overall pick coming out of training camp, winning a spot in the lineup and scoring 50 plus points, I really do believe that Benson plays the game in a way that will permit him to be that productive if he's given the opportunity. I think if he's given a bottom 6 role, you're not going to see many bottom 6 players throughout the league put up 50 plus points.
Yeah.
But if he's given consistent time playing with players of the caliber of Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner, then yeah, I think 50 plus points is more than reasonable if that's consistent. If he's averaging like 4 minutes a night and playing power play minutes, then yeah, I think that 50-ish point pace is quite reasonable as a prediction. And if he's returned to junior, he's going to light up the WHL all over again. And I don't think that would hurt him either. It would give him a year to work, especially on the skating, which I still think could use some work in terms of facilitating just the transition to the NHL level. And I'm not like concerned or anything with the skating. I just think that it would benefit him, and it would kind of unlock some further upside for him if he's able to really put some work in on that front. But this is not a player who needs an extra year of refinement in the WHL. I just don't think that it would hurt him either.
He was too good for his team at 16. He was the best player on his team at 16 years old. I don't think like in any situation sending him back to the WHL to be like the best player on his team for the 3rd year in a row, like that'll like his confidence is already high. His ability to make high end plays and his creativity is already kind of developed. I think if he stays in the NHL, it actually could be very beneficial to his game because he'll be consistently facing that high pace of play that will force him to adapt. He's a player who has consistently adapted. So I'm like, I'm still of the mind that, Zack Benson should be playing in the NHL, but at the end of the day, like, no player is necessarily harmed by being dominant for 3 years in a row. It's just that does he really have like something left to learn at the Dub? And if he was available to play in the AHL, this would be a great conversation to have between the NHL and AHL. But it's just the CHL NHL agreement, which is older than most of us, is just it's built the way it is, and it's a reality of drafting out of the CHL. But I mean, I'm fairly confident in Zack Benson's ability to stick around at the NHL level. I just, if he's, like you said, if he's going to be playing with bottom 6 minutes, it's not worth it. But, we're talking about all this and, assuming that Benson will survive the 9-game stint. It might just be that he, like, once he hits the actual regular season and he's facing true NHL lineups, you might see things change a bit. And it would be understandable after 9 games is sent back. I mean, he's like you said, he's a 13th overall pick in this past year's draft, 5'10", average skater. I've honestly liked his edge work and lateral mobility. It's just his straight line speed, his explosiveness.
It's the straight line speed.
Yeah. But like honestly, in tight quarters, like cutting to and from the net and kind of finding that open space is really good at that. Cutting off the boards he's really good at after winning board battles, and the intensity on him is really fun. So it's just, for me, you can build up that pace of play and that straight line speed anywhere you play. I'm not too worried about the level that he's playing at. If we were talking about a player who needs to develop his hockey sense, send him down. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Zach Benson.
That's not Zach Benson.
Zach Benson is one of the best thinkers I've ever seen. So like, I'm not worried at all.
Yeah.
That wraps things up for our first segment. Now we'll get into our second segment where we talk about some more preseason standouts among prospects, including the Boston Bruins, Matt Poitras, the Dallas Stars, Lian Bichsel, and a couple prospects on the Detroit Red Wings who have impressed. We'll get into that right after these messages here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
The NHL season is finally here, and that's why I want to tell you about Sleeper. Sleeper is my go-to platform for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you have the chance to win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. The NHL has never been more exciting than it is today, as we cover on this podcast. There is so much skill in this league, ranging from Connor McDavid to Sidney Crosby to Cale Makar and Connor Bedard. Simply select more or less based on their stats, such as goals, assists, points, saves, and more, to create the strongest team that you possibly can. Yes, you heard me. Sleeper offers 100 times payouts, so start paying attention, make the right picks, and you could win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some more preseason standouts. We'll start with the obvious one because holy, he has completely exceeded expectations on every level. And it's Matt Poitras out of the Boston Bruins, a prospect pool that we weren't too high on, and a prospect who we weren't too high on either. In Poitras, I mean, he's a player who I always knew what he was good at. He's good with his back to the play. He's able to spin off pressure. He's able to get to the middle. He's able to get some shots off. But I did not think that he would be this quick to be NHL ready. I mean, I saw a bit more of a slow development curve up, and I saw it ending a bit earlier than what we're seeing right now. Like, we're seeing a player who has not only been good enough for the NHL, he's been good enough for the top 6 on the Boston Bruins. Like, he has been ridiculous. What's your thoughts on his preseason so far? What do you like about his game? What do you think has developed the most, especially?
He's been excellent so far, as you said. I've really liked to see how he's kind of translated his strengths from the OHL level to NHL preseason, because they are really shining. And I thought his D+1 season last year was excellent as well. I thought that he really added a lot of pace to his game. I thought he was a lot more calculated in how he was applying his best tools in order to create advantages at 200 feet all over the ice, compared to his draft year season, where I thought that he was really outshone by other players on that Guelph team, like Danny Zhilkin, for instance. But he's been really consistently progressing since then, and Boston's bet has really turned out quite nicely from the 2022 NHL draft. I think that, like, for me, the two biggest things that have shifted in his game have been the pace at which he plays and the pace at which he thinks. Like, it's been all about the pace that has kind of been revamped in my viewings compared to his draft year footage. And that's been all that he's needed in order to be a bigger difference maker on the ice. And he's been applying his physicality, he's been applying his strength and his overall grit on the ice a lot more effectively and more intelligently than I thought he was previously. Like, in his draft year, he had a tendency to chase hits and he wasn't consistently in position, and that's completely changed. And while I definitely am not expecting him to be a top 6 piece for Boston this season, I do expect him to cool off a little bit here. I think that, as you said, I think he seems at the very least ready for the 9-game NHL stint. And once those regular season games are up, we'll see. But he might very well stick around and be a really useful bottom 6 piece for Boston long term. Like, this is a player who I still am a little bit skeptical of, like, long term top 6 upside for a true contending team. But he's already looking like a decent middle or bottom 6 option, maybe a potential middle 6 option moving forward. So yeah, his progression's been excellent.
100%. I'm talking about like a top 6 upside in terms of like this preseason, especially because he's not sticking around the top 6 if you have like the players that the Boston Bruins have in the top 6. It's slim pickings there, but I mean, you're looking at a player whose processing speed, especially, and it's just decision making overall has improved so much, and I'm curious to understand how that happened, because like it's one of the things that's very difficult to teach in scouting and in player development. It's just how do you develop your processing in order to match an NHL level of pace, and match the accuracy and quickness of decision making that is required at the NHL level just to stick around, just to keep your head above water, let alone succeed and play at the level that Poitras is playing right now. He's been truly one of the most impressive players in this preseason, and I mean, you're looking again at a prospect pool that absolutely needed a surprise standout like this, because outside of Fabian Lucel, Mason Lohrei, it's not the most deep kind of pool of players. So I'm fairly interested in seeing kind of how this develops for Poitras as he moves on. Does he become the best prospect in the Bruins pool? Does that stay Lucel or Lohrei? It's going to be very interesting to see develop. But moving on to Lian Bichsel, who has been very impressive in this preseason as well for the Dallas Stars. Repeated very, very good offensive and especially defensive performances. He's been a stalwart, helping the likes of Miro Heiskanen and other defensemen in that kind of decor break the puck out easier, disrupt play. He's always in the right spots. He's extremely physical and violent and aggressive, but not to the point of putting his team in trouble. But I've also been really impressed with the offensive progression. Can you talk a bit on that and kind of talk me through how that's developed in Bichsel's game?
Yeah, for sure. I've always been a bit of a bigger fan of Bichsel than you have. Like, I think going back to his draft year, I think I had him right at the edge of my first round. I think I had him 33rd overall. But he's really, really fun. I like his combination of mobility and power, which he displays both defensively and increasingly now offensively. I think that with the puck, he's gained a lot of composure since his draft year. In his draft year, often he'd get pressured in any of the 3 zones and just kind of dump out the puck. And now he's really kind of shedding that deer in the headlights I guess, response to pressure. And he's been really, really solid here in preseason. I've seen him activate a little bit more regularly offensively, but more importantly than that, in my view, he seems in control in possession of the puck in the offensive zone, which I saw increasingly last season, but was still a bit sporadic. So I'm hoping that really fully catches on this year for him in whichever league he ends up playing. Because I see a player here who could be a really, really solid two-way defender on a second pairing. He's not going to be a primary offensive driver by any means, but he's the type of player that is a strong transition defender, continuously improving defending the cycle as well. I really, really liked his progression last season in terms of protecting the slot and overall creating space for his goaltender to see the puck. And this is a very, very solid prospect, and was perhaps a slight reach for Dallas where they picked him in the late teens, but they're getting a pretty solid asset here that I think has a fairly, fairly high floor. I don't really see a possibility of Bichsel not becoming an NHLer at this point in time, but you never know with prospects. It can always go awry, but he's been really, really steady in my past couple of viewings over the last year and a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Now we'll end things off with Nate Danielson and Simon Edvinsson out of the Detroit Red Wings. Danielson was just recently picked up by the Detroit Red Wings. I thought he was definitely a reach. He's been decent in this preseason. I don't think he's been 9th overall impressive, especially not in this draft, but look at the details of his game, and it's an extremely polished, extremely mature game in all 3 zones. Especially I found it in transition. It was very impressive and very consistent as well. His ability to move the puck, to get into open spots quickly, and just help his team out in small increments along the way as they reach the offensive zone. And obviously we know how good he is as a two-way forward, his ability to win faceoffs, to play those important minutes, to shut down opponents. Like, it was decent. I still have yet to see that kind of high-end offensive upside that warrants a top 10 pick in this draft, but we'll see how that goes. But Simon Edvinsson has been just an absolute lock for the lineup for me so far. The mobility, the defensive ability, the transition game, the offensive skill, the creativity. I mean, it's all there with Edvinsson, right? I mean, do you see him as a good deep partner for example, Moritz Seider? Like, do you see that as a full-time deep pairing at the NHL level?
I'm not quite sure about just yet, just because of how well Jake Wallman played last season with Seider.
Yeah.
But I think if you're looking at the projections like 1 to 2 years in the future, I would say yes. I think those two complement each other quite nicely. Seider is a bit more solid defensively than Edvinsson is, but Edvinsson's come so far on that front since his draft season. And I think that those are two high-end two-way defensemen who could really complement each other quite nicely. But I don't think that play together. It could also be complementary to have them on separate pairings, because I think the two can play similar roles. But yeah, I think when you have two players that play with such fluidity, skill, and grit defensively too, you can't really harm yourself by putting them on the same pairing and having them just eat a ton of minutes. What I'm curious about is to see just how the defensive core shakes out in Detroit, because they've invested quite a bit of cap space into middling bottom of the lineup defensemen. So guys like Justin Hall, who just signed this offseason, I don't really see space for him in that lineup, especially with Edvinsson coming in now. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how that lineup shakes out. And as for Nate Danielson, I've been really impressed too in preseason. I think that he's been outperforming Marco Kasper so far, which is not what I expected in this preseason at all. And I know like some of fellow Dauber scout Jordan Harris has been remarking the same thing of Danielson really quite impressing in preseason and outshining Kasper too. So yeah, it's been solid all around for Detroit so far in preseason.
Absolutely. But that wraps things up for our second segment. And we'll move on to our third segment where we talk about a bit of an unfortunate situation with Aron Kiviharju. We'll talk about his injury, how that affects his rankings, all that good stuff. Right after these messages today on Locked On NHL Prospects.
Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you are looking for with eBay Motors. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
All right, so ending things off with a bit of injury talk here for 2024 NHL Draft eligible. We'll talk about Aron Kiviharju suffering an undisclosed injury. We often see that with draft eligibles. A lot of teams are not too willing to disclose kind of full details on injuries for players heading into his draft year. So that part's quite normal, but essentially he suffered an injury in practice, and he'll be sidelined for 4 months as he needed surgery in order to kind of help out with that. So we're talking about a 4-month absence. That means missing the World Juniors and going well into February, maybe even March in terms of an absence here. So first of all, we've seen this a couple times in the past with some different prospects, whether it's Ivan Miroshnichenko or, many other prospects who will miss like 3-4 months, maybe 5-6 months in their draft year. And 90% of the time their draft stock plummets, right?
Yeah.
Kiviharju was already starting to slip out of the kind of top 10 conversation. Where do you think he ends up, let's say, in 4 months? Are we talking about a player's outside of the first round, or is that too harsh?
I think that's a bit too harsh just because we don't have much of a draft year sample yet, and I think we need one in order to drop him that far. I think that Kiviharju is fortunate to have already built himself quite a decent like pre-draft season like profile. Like he's well known already in the hockey sphere and with NHL teams too. So that I think will help him like avoid a massive slip. But it's hard. It's hard to not expect him to fall into the top 15 or 20 by that point in time, right? Like it's going to it's going to be a bit tough for his overall draft projection, but hopefully he will be able to return in early February if that 4-month like estimate is accurate, and that will still give him a couple months of hockey. Now, whether or not he's going to be in full form during that stretch, we don't know, obviously, but fingers crossed he will be. And we've seen in the past, like late risers always have some potential to make a difference in their draft rankings, even as late as April, right? Like even just at the U18s, at like the last tournament of the season. So he's going to have an opportunity to bounce back if he's able to get healthy by then. But of course, it's heartbreaking, right? Like it's a massive, massive season for him. Like obviously, he is hoping to entrench himself as a top 10, top 5 potential pick. But an injury can always get in the way of that. But again, fingers crossed he's able to bounce back when he's healthy again.
100%. I'm looking at kind of the timeline here, and just the World Juniors are so pivotal because every scout and their mother seems to be there when the time comes.
And he's already played 2. Like he's already played more than most players in this draft will.
That's what I'm thinking. But I feel like teams are more likely to kind of put stock on their draft, on the player's draft year. Like that's the pivotal year where they're going to like. Sure, he was good in the last World Juniors and the one before when he was freaking 15. But how is he in his draft year? Like I've never understood that because he's he's good enough to make the lineup. He's good enough to perform. If he's injured, like you missing that, that player missing that tournament, and you not getting the opportunity to scout him against these particular players, doesn't mean that he's bad. I mean, especially if he goes back to the Liga against men and dominates and plays well and all that. Like I think there's still a chance for redemption in terms of Kiviharju's draft stock. But I feel like at this point, given this and given how NHL teams have tended to draft in the past, we're probably looking at a player who ends up in the 10 to 20 range who shouldn't be in the 10 to 20 range. I still believe in Aron Kiviharju's skill set. I am a big fan. I mean, the processing especially is just so impressive. That combination with his mobility, with his decision making off the rush. I mean, there's so much to like about Kiviharju's game. I think it would be a shame if he ends up being a player who drops off massively due to this injury. But we're looking at a player who definitely has a skill set in order to kind of bounce back if he can get back in time to play some meaningful minutes in the Finnish Liga and kind of see some regular time there. Does that change things in your mind? The fact that he's going to be missing the World Juniors, but at least, he's going to be back to play against men at some point. He's going to have the chance to kind of bounce back. Do you see him maybe carving out a top 5 role, or do you agree with me in terms of like, it's almost definite that at the end of the day, he's picked in the 10 to 20 range?
I think top 5 is perhaps a little bit difficult, but I think that kind of also goes down to the combination of his injury and the fact that he's an undersized defenseman. I think if he were bigger, there'd be a better chance of him like quickly like re-winning his draft stock. But I have a question for you. If you are at the draft table at the 2024 NHL draft and you're picking like 12th overall or 13th overall, what is your argument to pick Kiviharju with what you've seen so far of him?
He's one of the most dynamic and creative defensemen I've watched in a long time. I love the awareness, just the vision and ability. Like there's an element to his game that's very difficult to kind of both encapsulate and teach. He's just, a lot of what he does is very kind of, he's got a mature game, but not to the level of like a Sam Dickinson where he's your meat and potatoes, good old Canadian boy. Like he's got some originality, some creativity. He's got some kind of lateral movement that's really interesting. He'll take some decisions where you're like, what are you doing? And then you kind of let the play unfold. You're like, oh, that's what you were doing. Like he's got many of those elements. So I'm fairly confident in his ability to kind of read the game better than a lot of the defensemen in this draft class. I'd say, defensively, definitely Sam Dickinson reads the game better than him.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like especially offensively, I can't really name you too many. Like Cole Hudson's in that conversation. Zane Parekh, maybe. Yeah, that's like, but he's up there in terms of processing with like one of the best kind of four-way mobility in this draft with some decent defensive acumen, a powerful shot, really accurate and creative playmaking. Like the awareness, mobility, and kind of foundational defensive skill is definitely there. He needs some developing. He's very raw, but he's a player that's been playing above his age group for the longest time and has excelled in those areas. So I'm really like I'm sold on him so far, but we'll see how he plays when he gets back. Like I'll give him until like April, because obviously you come back in February from like a 4-month absence after surgery. Like it's going to be a slow progression when he comes back, but if by April we're still looking at a player who hasn't really reached expectations so far, I'd be willing to have a conversation to skip him at 12th, but I've just been really impressed so far. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great argument. I like it.
All right. So that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe, leave us a comment. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. If you're your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Lockdown Sports today. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we talk about a lot of OHL stuff. This has been Hattie Kalikev, Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.